Printing press in Medina, Saudi Arabia has the capacity to publish 10 million Qurans a year in Arabic and 44 other languages. These are distributed around the world, well below cost and in some cases for free. And it's fascinating to see how the Saudi religious establishment has augmented the text. Into the verse that speaks of those who have earned God's anger and gone astray, they have inserted, in brackets, such as the Jews and such as the Christians. And into the verse calling upon the faithful to make their armaments ready against the enemies of Islam, the translator has made another insertion: tanks, planes, missiles and artillery.
What you have got are modern armaments set within the Quran itself. And interesting enough, in the introduction to this, and it is by a notable leader in Saudi, you have a justification for violent conflict, jihad, for suicide bombing, and it is stated clearly that the Quran is the perfect model for warfare.
Any suggestion of distortion in the text is highly contentious because of the special significance of the Quran in the minds of Muslims. Unlike most Christians and Jews who believe their sacred texts to be authored by men inspired by God, Muslims believe the Quran to be the word of God as dictated to the Prophet Muhammad. This distinction means that critical analysis of the sacred texts becomes an extremely sensitive issue when applied to the Quran. And the problem is compounded when some of the scholars making the attempt are Western non-Muslims. Are they really in a position to shed new light on the text and its origins? In 1972, during the restoration of the Great Mosque of Sana'a, capital of North Yemen, workers discovered a mash of old parchments in a loft between the inner and outer roofs. The entire load was stuffed into some 20 potato sacks, where it might have remained were it not for the arrival 7 years later of Dr. Geert Puin, a German scholar and Quranic expert. Puin immediately grasped the significance of the find. Working with a team of local assistants, he carefully prized the layers apart and fired off thousands of photographs. 4 fragments immediately caught Puin's attention. They contained the first and last chapters of the Quran, and unlike any other Qurans in existence, they were illustrated with architectural drawings of mosques, a vital clue to their origin.
Man kann eben diesen
Because of its drawings, because of the art historical context, you can date this Quran very precisely to the time of Al-Walid.
sehr genau datieren auf die Zeit von Al-Walid.
This is the reign between 705 and 715.
5 und 715.
The oldest datable Quran in the world, created some 70 years after the death of the Prophet. From the potato sacks, Puin identified fragments from nearly 1,000 different Qurans. Comparisons between them and the standard Cairo text in use today are startling. These early texts are written in a kind of shorthand with no vowel markings or distinguishing dots, which means that individual words can have up to 30 different meanings.
Es ist tatsächlich so, dass man durch die schiere Existenz
The sheer existence of so many different possible readings would suggest that this text wasn't passed down word for word.
der Text eben nicht wortwörtlich überliefert.
The text isn't as stable as it seems in the Cairo version.
In der Fassung von Kairo erscheint.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
Muslim scholars today argue that the integrity of every word of the text has been perfectly preserved through the oral tradition. But the written Quran shows variation. Forensic examination of the Sana'a fragments revealed earlier texts that had been washed off and overwritten. Although the hidden text revealed no contradictory meanings, words had been changed, verses and whole chapters rearranged.
If his researches are correct, particularly on dating, it suggests, in fact, that the Quran was not a single product, a single entity that was fixed by 650, but actually developed much, much later, hence the overlaying of texts of written materials.
Years, imagine the Anglo-Saxon peasant talking to his master, who was a Norman and spoke a mixed language of French and an Anglo-Saxon, and you could only understand that mixed language with a knowledge of both.
Muslim scholars of the past had the confidence to acknowledge foreign words in the Quran. In the 10th century, Al-Tabari, one of the most respected commentators, identified Hebrew, Latin, Greek, Persian, Abyssinian, and Syriac words. The difference, though, is that Luxemburg is claiming new meanings, and at a time when critical examination of the text is actively discouraged. How can one professor of linguistics challenge the collective judgment of over 1 billion people, and on what basis? What methods does he use?
Ich bin natürlich bemüht, zunächst einmal
I take into consideration the meaning of the root, of the corresponding root in Syriac, or a possible misreading. Misreading in this case means that the undotted text was dotted wrongly. Then there's also the possibility that a Syriac letter was, by mistake, written within an Arabic text.
Using these methods, Luxemburg examined some of the most obscure passages of the Quran. After Mary has given birth to Jesus, in the Arabic Quran, the archangel says to her, "Be not sad, your Lord has placed a rivulet beneath you." In Luxemburg's version, "Be not sad, your Lord has made your delivery legitimate." And there are other examples. God's command to a skeptic in Arabic, "Look at your food and drink, look at your ass," becomes "Look at your condition, and look at your overall state." At the end of the world, the earth steps forward in Arabic. In Syriac, the earth splits open. But do any of these changes affect the central precepts of Islam?
It's certainly not key precepts like the existence of God or afterlife, which is challenged by my interpretation, but many everyday customs. One example is the veil. The Quranic verse adduced to prove their position talked about humur, which had to be beaten on the pockets. The sentence was a bit obscure. It's usually rendered that it means cover your head and your cleavage. And if you have a look at the chador, the veil in Iran, for example, that's exactly what is covered. But with my Syriac interpretation of the verse, my translation is, put your belt around your hips. And the belt was a sign of chastity, also especially used by monks. So that makes it much more meaningful.
It's Luxemburg's references to paradise that caused the greatest offense. In the Iranian city of Isfahan, there's a 17th century palace built to represent the gates of heaven. The cool greens of the gardens beyond express the longings of a desert people and are beautifully described in the Quran, along with flowing fountains and the favors of huris, usually understood as wide-eyed virgins. One commentary, but not the Quran, even specifies numbers, 72 for each righteous man. But that doesn't sit well with 7 verses of the Quran that promise the righteous eternal contentment with their wives. Luxemburg believes he has resolved this contradiction.
There is one passage in the Quran dealing with the huris, in which it says, وَزَوَجْنَاهُمْ بِحُورٍ عِينٍ. We have paired them with dark, wide-eyed maidens. That is the traditional understanding of this verse. If you put the dots on the undotted text a little bit differently, what comes out is, we will make you comfortable under white crystal clear grapes.
For the suicide bomber, then, not the prospect of 72 virgins in paradise, but a modest bunch of grapes.
German study, as far as I'm concerned, is very Christian-centric. It's influenced by the way Bible has been researched and put together. Bible and the Quran are not the same.
It's the connection with Christian symbolism that is so controversial to some. This 5th century mural in an Egyptian monastery depicts the archangels receiving souls in paradise. Each archangel holds a grape in one hand and in the other cradles the departed souls, who are refreshed with bunches of grapes. The grape motif is repeated in the vestments of the priests of the Syrian Orthodox Church, all relating back to Christ's promise to his disciples at the Last Supper that he will not drink again of the fruit of the vine until he is reunited with them in his Father's kingdom.
For us to acknowledge both a cultural, religious, and a theological heritage with Christianity over Judaism is not problematic at all. In fact, it's part of our body politic as Muslims that we must believe and accept those scriptures as being part of the whole corpus of divine revelation from the beginning of time.
Although Luxemburg's work has been called into question by leading academics and has not been independently corroborated, he believes it opens a door, encouraging linguists, archaeologists and historians to use modern tools to throw further light on the text and its context. For some Muslim scholars, that is in the Quranic spirit of free inquiry, and no threat to those who are robust in their faith.
This research by Luxemburg and his colleagues doesn't undermine any of the basic tenets, teachings, or principles of Islam. What it does, though, is to provide interesting questions. And we, as thinking Muslims, as people of the 21st century, that we should say, yes, let's look at what he's providing. And let's not just condemn, but let's also see if this research has a historical base, or is it a product of European Orientalism.
The Quran has brought comfort and peace to countless millions. It has given the humblest peasant and laborer a sense of worth and dignity rarely equaled in any other civilization. It has taught people of different races to live in brotherhood and people of different creeds to live side by side in reasonable harmony. It has inspired a great civilization in which Muslims live creative and useful lives and which, by its achievements, enrich the whole world.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
But when Muslims feel marginalized and threatened, this dignity and courtesy can give way to an explosive mixture of rage and hatred, impelling spokesmen for a great spiritual and ethical religion to seek approval in the Quran for violent confrontation. And this at a time when more Muslims are probably reading and hearing the Quran than in all of previous history. Electronically sophisticated believers can even access the text in its original Arabic or in translation through the new generation of electronic Qurans. But modern technology has also given tremendous power and scope to those determined to impose their own interpretations on the Quran.
We Muslims have been ordered to do brainwashing.
Scores of satellite channels compete for the attention of Muslims across the world.
Equality of women is a bunch of foolishness.
The summit
of Islam is jihad.
الله أن يرد كيد الكائدين وأن يدمر اليهود ومن عاونهم من.
Now, of course, the latest technology is the internet, which is a very important platform for the spread of fundamentalist types of religion. It's depressing to see how profoundly a religion's temper can be shaped simply by purely technological developments, but that is one of the things that's happening at the moment.
The internet has become the chosen forum of radicals and extremists. On this site, Mohammed Siddiq Khan posts his own obituary prior to the 7/7 London bombing, where he played the key role.
We are at war and I'm a soldier. Now you too will taste the reality of this situation.
The full effect of all this propaganda can only be guessed at. But certainly some men and women have changed the way they believe they should live their lives according to the Quran, and in a very short time, turning a great city like Cairo into a place that would be unrecognizable to anyone returning here after an absence of only 30 years.
Up until 1974, I had not seen a single veiled woman.
If the veil is worn, it must cover the face and hide the beauty.
But it's not just a question of interpretation. Sometimes there's a selective reading of the text, ignoring, for instance, the firm injunction to forgive any wrongdoer who sincerely repents. Or claiming approval for ancient cultural practices that have no basis in the Quran.
It is an African cultural practice. It harms a female body. It's mutilating a female body. Not allowed.
But there are verses, particularly those referring to women, which are controversial. Yet for every reference that seems to suggest their inferior status, there are others calling for mutual respect and equality.
The Quran honors women. The Quran dignifies women. I feel that as a woman every day.
And that's the paradox and the challenge of the Quran.
The Quran has two audiences. It has an immediate 7th century patriarchal tribal audience. Then it has the ultimate audience, you and I of this generation, of this age, and whoever comes in the future. So it talks two languages for two sets of people.
We have to make changes from time to time, not in the Quran itself, because it's static, but in the way we try to understand, in the way we try to interpret this book.
The Quran is constantly enjoining us to reflect, to question, to understand, to use our mental faculties, to use our heart and understanding.
The Quran is telling you, go and look and study and understand and try to change for the better. You are here as reformists. You have to reform yourself, your heart and the world for the better. This is the way the Quran should be in your life, a companion, a light, and helping you to be creative.
Over 1 billion people cherish the Quran as the authentic word of God, his final message. How Muslims interpret that message will affect the future of Islam and all mankind.